You may have seen or read in the news recently that Nissan could be about to collapse. It all starts from a report by the Financial Times that has a senior person close to Nissan quoted as saying it has 12 to 14 months to survive, and that if it doesn't, it is exploring all options in terms of selling to another car brand or another brand altogether. Now, if this turns out to be true, it actually makes me feel quite sad because Nissan, to me anyway, someone in my generation, I'm 41 years old, is a brand that's just always been there. It's familiar, it's trustworthy, and they have made a number of excellent cars or great cars. From the early days of the Datsuns, the 1200U to the 1600, even the 120Y, when it arrived on the global scale, it showed the Americans and the British and even the Australians to some extent. I mean, we didn't make that many cars, but when they arrived in Australia, they were more efficient. They proved that you don't actually need a massive vehicle, much more practical and much more reliable than the equivalent, American or Australian or British alternative. And then in modern times, you had all the sports cars, the 200SX, the Silvia, and all the Z cars, of course, and then obviously the GTR. Now, the GTR to me is, if there was a top 10 Hall of Fame of cars, especially kind of drivers, sporty cars, the GTR would be in there and somewhere pretty high up on that list. It's hard for a car brand to have a vehicle in that top 10 Hall of Fame list. So now to hear that it could be going bankrupt or, dissolving in some way, it's just hard to believe. Now, in recent times, we've seen Nissan step away from some of those iconic vehicles, the drivers' cars, and even the off-road vehicles. So we've had the Nissan Patrol has always been a pretty hardcore off-road vehicle in its early days, and then it's sort of graduated and sort of matured a bit to the Y62. I mean, it's still very capable off-road, but there's some that argue it's not as heavy duty or as rugged as a Land Cruiser, mainly because it's got independent rear suspension, while the Land Cruiser's got a live axle still. This is not about Land Cruiser versus Patrol, don't worry, I'm not going to go into deep about it, but yeah, you can see how they've changed a little bit. And even, Nissan Pathfinder, Nissan X-Trail, when that first came out, it was pretty rugged. You could take it off-road, whereas the current model, or maybe even the previous generation model, quite soft, very practical, great little SUV or mid-size SUV, but yeah, lost its original kind of focus. Now, the Y63 Patrol, some people are probably not going to like me saying this, but I think that's going down the same line. I know it's switched to a V6 turbo now, with replacing the V8. I don't see that as much of a big deal because it's got more power and more torque, 317 kilowatts and 700 newton meters, up from the V8, which is around 298 kilowatts and 560 newton meters. But yeah, if you have a look at some of the pictures, it's quite a luxurious and pretty flash Range Rover style of rival. It's definitely, you don't look at it and think, wow, that's going to go far off-road, even though it probably will. The tyres as well, I can see, they're pretty low profile. So that tells me, yeah, this is going to be a bit more of a luxury off-roader than a pure hardcore, rugged off-roader. Does that mean it will drop off in terms of popularity? Potentially. I'm just going to check out VFACTS, new vehicle registration figures, because the Y62 is going really good. And as we saw with the 200 series to the 300 series, 200 series sales really went up as everybody grabbed the last kind of V8. I think that will happen with the Y63 as well, and I think it probably already is starting to happen. Although it is a very good value vehicle as well, especially against the Land Cruiser, which is, up to $50,000 more expensive. Yeah, so according to October VFACTS figures for 2024, 813 sales in October, that's up 10.9% compared with last October. Then year to date, 6,709, and that's up 6.2%. Land Cruiser sales are up 9.8% year to date. So there might have been a bit of a spike when the 300 series was coming along. Everyone wanted to jump in the V8, but it looks like the Land Cruiser is actually not failing, well, compared with last year anyway. But back to Nissan. So what's going on? Well, it looks like it's in debt, being part of the Renault, Nissan, Mitsubishi alliance. It's kind of convoluted and a bit complex the way they've done that, and they're all pretty much make the same type of vehicle. Sometimes you see brands mesh together, two very different brands mesh together, and then they bring both forms of expertise together, and it can work. But I think here the problem kind of began when all three brands came together producing the same kind of product. Sometimes you see that though, not even in the car industry, where a big brand will buy another one, a slightly smaller brand, merge together and then become a super brand, you know? Whereas here they've kind of remained separate even though they're pretty similar. But the biggest problem here is, of course, dropping sales and revenue. So in recent times, they have slashed 9,000 jobs. When you slash jobs like that, I mean, it doesn't always mean there's problems. You know, AI technology, machines that are building vehicles, they can cause job cuts as well, but 9,000 is pretty hefty. And that's on the back of a $94 million loss reported in the third quarter of this year, which is pretty nuts. I saw an interesting chart pop up on social media earlier this week, which shows the global sales for new vehicles between January and September this year. Toyota is clearly at the top with almost 8 million sales. And then McLaren is listed at the bottom, or at number 49, with just under 2,000 sales. But if we look in the middle section, you might notice a bit of a trend. GWM, SAIC, Mahindra, Dongfeng, and then GAC, which is very similar to GAC. That's pretty funny. And then JAC and Leapmotor, Neon, and XPeng as well. These new brands are climbing very quickly. Most of them are Chinese, or all of them were that I just listed, except for Mahindra, which is Indian. And that is worrying, at least for the established car brands, such as Nissan. And in fact, Nissan in China recorded its biggest slump of 14.3% between April and September this year, followed by the United States, according to a report by Drive. And there's a lot of reports out there that are showing information where the established car brands, by established I mean, you know, Toyota, Nissan, all these ones that have been around for at least 40 or 50 years, their sales have dropped significantly in China. Now you think, why is that a big deal? Well, China is a massive market. They've got a lot of people there. And the reason for the drop is because China is starting to make its own vehicles with these new brands. So it doesn't need these established brands anymore. If only Australia could do the same thing with Ford and Holden, right? The established car brands are starting to drop in sales, and it is making a decent impact, or a big enough impact, on the company bottom line on a global scale. I've been reporting on the car industry for about 15 years, and when you do something for that long, like in any industry, your brain starts to develop patterns and predictions, and some of them are pretty accurate. And I think it's kind of happening here. I think Nissan is just one of many car brands or established car brands that could be facing some sort of collapse in the near future because of what's happening out of China. Now, I don't want to get into an argument of are Chinese vehicles good or bad. At this stage, I would not buy a Chinese vehicle, not because it's Chinese, but because it's not developed to the standard that I want. I want a better engine, I want better suspension, and I want interiors that don't feel a bit cheap, or an interior that is designed for a driver, not designed as a capsule with a massive screen in it. That's just my opinion. I think Chinese vehicle brands will get there very, very quickly. They already are getting there so quickly. So I think in another 5 years' time, they'll be right up there with where Toyota or Nissan or some of the German brands are already, or were even 5 or 10 years ago, straight away, because they're just so fast at adapting and evolving. I think another thing too is they're very quick at updating their vehicles, which is causing the resale value to drop down, but they're evolving in a way that each update is better and better, and you think, wow, this is actually a good product. So at this stage, I would not buy a Chinese vehicle, not because of any sort of political or racist thing even. It's just the products are not quite there yet to my standards. Now, I'm a car nut, so I've got pretty high standards for vehicles. But I can totally understand why the majority of the population are at least considering a Chinese vehicle or a vehicle by a new brand. This all reminds me of a conversation I had with the then boss of GM Holden. This was in about 2015 2015. It was before Ford Australia announced it would be closing its local operations. And I said to him, there's rumors of Ford Australia closing down. What do you think about that? That's good, isn't it, for you? And he said, I'm just paraphrasing, by the way. He said something like, no, I'm worried. If Ford Australia closes down, we're kind of next in line. We do exactly what Ford Australia does. So we would be worried as well. And I think that mentality should be applied here. If Nissan does close down, I think some other brands, established brands that we all sort of know and trust, could follow suit in the not too distant future. Toyota's global sales so far this year, so this is January through to October, not January through to September, as we saw in that previous chart, are down 1.5% to 8.3 million. Now compared with BYD, a Chinese vehicle company, it sold 3.25 million new energy vehicles, so that's hybrids and electric vehicles, during the same January to October period. That's up 36.49%, which is crazy. Some of these other established brands are dropping in sales while these new age or these new vehicle brands are rising very rapidly. It just makes me sad that Nissan can make so many great cars in its history and then just slowly lose touch with its roots. We saw that recently, well, we could be about to see that, judging by Jaguar's recent ad campaign. It looks like it has completely just dismissed all of its history in motorsport, making glorious engines and glorious designs. We've got a teaser of this new Jaguar that's coming out. It looks like the one of those electrical boxes you find on the street. It's just very sad that a brand can just forget about or just totally neglect such a rich history. But we all could be wrong. There's a lot of complaints and criticism against Jaguar and its new marketing campaign, but a marketing campaign could be or can be very different to the vehicle. We've seen heaps of TV ads over the years of cars that have nothing to do with the car. The car comes out and it's actually fine. It's just the ad that's really shit. That hopefully is what is happening here with Jaguar. I doubt it, but hopefully let's keep our fingers crossed. We all want Jaguar to make a nice vehicle. They're always, it's a brand that always has made, even if it's, had a bit of a hit and miss with some models, the intentions are always there to create something that's just very nice to drive. Go back to its roots of the original ad campaign of grace, space and pace. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Will you be sad like me if Nissan does actually dissolve or collapse in some way? And feel free to tell me what you think of the new Jaguar ad as well.